The text from my sister hit my phone at 9:37 on Good Friday evening. "Don't come to Easter brunch. Your divorce makes you look pathetic." I stood in my empty Manhattan penthouse staring at tomorrow's Wall Street Journal spread across my marble countertop. My face smiled back from the cover story about tech innovation and second chances. My phone buzzed again with a calendar reminder: Easter Sunday investment meeting with mysterious potential backer. I texted Amanda back simply, "Understood." What Amanda didn't know was that her fiancé Derek's demanding boss had just scheduled this life-changing meeting at my home. Saturday morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, casting long shadows across the minimalist furniture that now filled spaces where family photos once sat. The divorce had stripped away more than just Jessica's belongings. It had taken the warmth, the laughter, the sense that this place was truly home, rather than just an expensive address overlooking Central Park. I made coffee in the same machine Jessica and I had picked out 3 years ago, during a happier times back when we thought our future was unshakable. The irony wasn't lost on me that the Wall Street Journal had chosen this weekend to run their profile piece titled "From Garage to Glory: How Tech Entrepreneurs Rebuild After Personal Setbacks." The timing felt like the universe's cruel joke. My company Neural Dynamics had started in my parents' garage when I was 24. Amanda was just 21, then still in college, still believing her big brother could solve any problem. I'd built revolutionary AI software that could predict market patterns with unprecedented accuracy. The technology had attracted initial investors, then bigger ones, until suddenly I was worth $50 million and married to my college sweetheart. Amanda had always lived in my shadow, though she'd never admit it. She'd carved out her own success as a marketing executive at a prestigious Madison Avenue firm, pulling down a 6-figure salary and living in her beautiful Westchester home. But at family gatherings, conversations always seemed to drift back to my latest business ventures or the articles written about my innovations. Our parents died in a car accident when I was 16 and Amanda was 13. I'd practically raised her through high school, making sure she got into a good college, helping with her tuition, even though the insurance money would have covered it. I wanted her to have everything, to never feel the loss of our parents' support. Maybe that's where I went wrong. Maybe I made her feel smaller instead of lifting her up. The divorce had been brutal. Jessica claimed I was an emotionally unavailable workaholic who cared more about algorithms than our marriage. She wasn't entirely wrong. When you're building something from nothing, every day feels like a battle for survival. I'd missed dinners, canceled vacations, spent weekends in the office when I should have been home. But I thought I was building our future together. Jessica took half of everything in the settlement, including most of our mutual friends, and somehow my family's sympathy. Amanda had sided with Jessica during the proceedings, claiming I'd always prioritized work over relationships. The betrayal from my sister hurt worse than losing the money or even the marriage itself. Now, 6 months later, I lived alone in this penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home. The company was struggling too. The divorce had been public enough to rattle investor confidence, and I'd been forced to consider outside funding to keep the doors open. That's where Monday's meeting came in. My assistant had scheduled it months ago, back when I was still married, and Amanda still invited me to family events. The potential investor had insisted on meeting at my home, claiming he preferred to understand entrepreneurs in their personal environment. All I knew was that he represented a major investment firm and was interested in discussing a $50 million funding round. I spent Saturday afternoon preparing the penthouse for the meeting. I arranged financial projections and technical specifications on my dining room table, set up my laptop for the presentation, and stocked the kitchen with expensive coffee and pastries from the French bakery downstairs. Everything had to be perfect. This meeting could save my company and prove to everyone, including myself, that I wasn't the failure my divorce had made me feel like. As I reviewed my presentation materials that evening, my mind kept drifting to Amanda's text. "Your divorce makes you look pathetic." The word stung because part of me worried they might be true. Had I become pathetic? Was that how everyone saw me now? The successful entrepreneur brought low by personal failure. I'd built my entire adult life around being the reliable one, the successful one. the brother who had everything figured out. Now I was 32, divorced and fighting to save the company I'd sacrificed my marriage to build. Maybe Amanda was right to be embarrassed by me. My phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender's address made me pause, rendersonahendersonassoc.com. The signature line read, Richard Henderson, Senior Managing Partner, Henderson & Associates. I recognized the firm name immediately. It was one of the most prestigious investment companies on Wall Street, known for backing major tech innovations. What I didn't realize yet was that Henderson & Associates was also where Derek Thompson worked as a junior partner, desperately trying to climb the corporate ladder and prove himself worthy of marrying into what he thought was a successful family. Easter Sunday arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that makes Manhattan feel almost peaceful. I woke at 6, unable to sleep longer, despite the early meeting time still hours away. My penthouse felt enormous in the morning silence, every footstep echoing off the hardwood floors as I moved through my morning routine. I showered and dressed carefully, choosing clothes that projected confidence without seeming like I was trying too hard. Dark jeans, a crisp white button-down, and a navy blazer. Expensive, but understated. The kind of outfit that said I was successful, but approachable professional, but not corporate. 25 miles north in Westchester, Amanda was orchestrating what she'd planned as the perfect Easter celebration. Her colonial-style home sparkled with fresh flowers and elegant place settings. She'd invited extended family, Derek's parents, and several of their mutual friends. The dining room table groaned under the weight of glazed ham, roasted vegetables, and her famous carrot cake. Derek paced nervously around their kitchen, checking his phone every few minutes. He'd been agitated all week, muttering about his boss, Richard Henderson, and some important meeting that could determine his future at the firm. Amanda barely listened, focused on ensuring every detail of their celebration was flawless. What Amanda didn't know was that Derek had been quietly leveraging his connection to me for months at work. During coffee conversations and casual meetings, he'd mentioned his brilliant future brother-in-law who'd built a tech empire from nothing. He'd positioned this family connection as one of his key assets, implying he had inside access to innovative technologies and emerging market insights. Derek was drowning at Henderson & Associates. Despite his MBA from Wharton and his family connections, he couldn't seem to close the big deals that would secure his position. Other junior partners were outperforming him, and he felt the constant pressure of Richard Henderson's legendary perfectionism. Richard was known throughout the industry for his ability to spot promising investments and his equal reputation for destroying the careers of those who disappointed him. Back in my penthouse, I arranged the final details for the meeting. The Wall Street Journal lay prominently on my coffee table, opened to the profile piece about my journey through personal and professional challenges. The article painted my divorce as a temporary setback rather than a fundamental failure, focusing instead on my innovative technology and potential for future growth. I'd prepared extensively for this presentation. Neural Dynamics had developed an AI platform that could analyze market patterns, predict trading opportunities, and execute transactions faster than any human trader. The technology was revolutionary, capable of processing vast amounts of financial data and identifying patterns invisible to traditional analysis methods. The potential applications were enormous. Investment firms could use the platform to optimize their portfolios, minimize risks, and maximize returns. In early testing, the AI had consistently outperformed human traders by margins that seemed almost impossible. If I could secure proper funding, the technology could transform the entire financial industry. At exactly 10:30, Amanda stood in her kitchen, adding final touches to the Easter centerpiece, while her guests mingled in the living room. Derek's parents were asking about his work, and she could hear him struggling to explain his current projects without sounding uncertain. She felt a familiar twinge of anxiety about their financial future. Derek's salary was good, but not spectacular, and his path to senior partner seemed increasingly unclear. The irony was devastating. While Amanda excluded me from the family gathering because my divorce embarrassed her, Derek was building his entire professional reputation on his connection to me. He'd never told Amanda about the extent to which he'd used my name at work, knowing she'd be uncomfortable with the deception. At 10:45, I double-checked my presentation one final time. The financial projections were solid, the technical specifications were comprehensive, and the market analysis demonstrated enormous potential for growth. Everything was ready. I just needed to convince Richard Henderson that Neural Dynamics was worth the risk. My doorman called up at exactly 11 o'clock. "Sir, there's a gentleman here for your meeting. Says his name is Richard Henderson. Send him up, please." I straightened my blazer and walked to the front door, taking a deep breath to calm my nerves. Through the security camera, I watched a distinguished man in his early 60s step out of the elevator. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit and carried a leather portfolio that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his bearing suggested someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Richard Henderson looked exactly like what I'd expected from one of Wall Street's most powerful investors. What I hadn't expected was the way his expression would change when he stepped into my penthouse and noticed the Wall Street Journal on my coffee table. He picked up the newspaper, studied my photograph on the cover, then looked directly at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between recognition and confusion flickered across his features. "You're Boris Thompson," he said slowly. "Yes, sir. Thank you for coming." His next words hit me like a physical blow. "You're Derek Thompson's future brother-in-law." The air in my penthouse seemed to crystallize around Richard Henderson's words. He stood holding the Wall Street Journal, his piercing blue eyes moving between my photograph and my actual face, with an intensity that made my stomach clench. "Derek talks about you constantly." Richard continued, his voice taking on an edge I couldn't interpret yet. "His brilliant future brother-in-law who built a tech empire. Boris this, Boris that. How you're revolutionizing artificial intelligence, how you understand market dynamics better than anyone in the industry." My mind raced to process this information. Derek had been talking about me at work. Amanda had never mentioned this. In fact, she'd gone out of her way to minimize my achievements at family gatherings, often changing the subject when anyone asked about my business success. Richard set down the newspaper with deliberate precision, his movements controlled but carrying an undercurrent of tension. Derek positioned this family connection as one of his primary assets at our firm. He's implied for months that he has special insight into emerging technologies through his relationship with you. The pieces started falling into place, each one landing with sickening clarity. Derek had been using our family connection professionally, while Amanda excluded me from family events. The contradiction was almost absurd. Derek valued my association enough to build his career on it, while Amanda found my presence embarrassing enough to uninvite me from Easter dinner. "I wasn't aware Derek had been discussing me at your firm," I admitted carefully, trying to gauge Richard's mood. His expression was shifting from professional interest to something that looked increasingly like anger. "Oh, he's been discussing you extensively," Richard said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "In fact, Derek suggested several times that he could arrange introductions between you and our firm for potential investment opportunities. He positioned himself as the key liaison for accessing your innovations." The blood drained from my face. Derek had been promising his boss access to me and my technology without ever asking my permission or even informing me of these conversations. He'd built expectations and professional relationships based on a family connection he'd never bothered to cultivate personally. "Mr. Henderson," I began, but he held up a hand to stop me. "The truly remarkable thing," Richard continued, his tone growing colder, "is that Derek never mentioned he'd be attending a family Easter gathering today while I was meeting with his famous future brother-in-law. He never suggested that this meeting timing might be relevant to his own schedule or interests." 25 miles away, Derek stood in Amanda's kitchen, his phone clutched in his sweaty palm as he tried unsuccessfully to reach Richard. He'd been calling every 20 minutes since 10 o'clock ostensibly to wish his boss a happy Easter, but actually to fish for information about the mysterious Sunday meeting Richard had mentioned in passing on Friday. Amanda bustled around him arranging food on serving platters while their guests enjoyed mimosas in the living room. She was in her element, playing the perfect hostess, showing off her beautiful home and successful relationship. The absence of her pathetic, recently divorced brother was just one more detail that made the celebration feel appropriately refined. "Derek, you're making me nervous with all that pacing," Amanda said, not looking up from her careful arrangement of glazed ham slices. "Your phone calls can wait. It's Easter." Derek forced a smile, but couldn't shake his anxiety. Richard Henderson was notorious for his unpredictable schedule and his tendency to conduct important business at unconventional times. If Richard was meeting with a major potential client today, Derek needed to know about it. His entire career strategy depended on staying informed about Richard's activities and finding ways to make himself indispensable. Back in my penthouse, Richard pulled out his own phone and began scrolling through his messages. "Let me show you something interesting," he said, finding what he was looking for. This text came in about an hour ago. He turned the screen toward me. The message read, "Boss, hope your Sunday meeting goes well. My fiancé's family is asking about your Easter plans. Should I tell them you're meeting the famous tech guy from the newspaper?" My heart sank as I recognized the implications. Derek knew exactly who Richard was meeting today, and he'd been planning to leverage this information somehow. The text suggested Derek had been discussing Richard's business activities with Amanda's family, probably trying to impress them with his insider knowledge. "Derek sent this while you and I were shaking hands in your lobby," Richard said, his voice now carrying unmistakable fury. "He's been playing me for months, positioning himself as my gateway to your innovations while apparently scheduling family events during my business meetings." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Derek been using my reputation without permission, but he'd also been manipulating both sides of the relationship. He'd built his professional standing on promises of access to me, while simultaneously allowing Amanda to exclude me from family gatherings. Richard's phone buzzed again. Another message from Derek. "Actually, never mind about telling the family. Want to keep some separation between work and personal life." Huh. Talk Monday. Richard showed me this message too, his expression dark with anger. He's trying to cover his tracks now. Probably realized this situation could explode in his face. I stared at the messages, feeling a complex mix of betrayal, anger, and bitter amusement. Derek had been living a double life, professionally profiting from his connection to me, while personally supporting Amanda's decision to cut me out of family events. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "Mr. Henderson," I said carefully, "I want you to know that I had no knowledge of Derek's representations to your firm. I've never discussed my business with him, and he certainly never asked my permission to use my name in his professional activities." Richard studied my face intently, as if trying to determine whether I was complicit in Derek's deception. After a long moment, his expression shifted slightly. "You know what I believe you," which makes this situation even more infuriating. He began pacing across my living room, his expensive shoes clicking on the hardwood floors. "I've been in this business for 40 years. I've seen every kind of manipulation, every type of professional deception. But using family connections you haven't even properly cultivated, that's a new level of stupidity." My phone started ringing. Amanda's name appeared on the screen. Richard noticed the caller ID, and his eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. "That's perfect timing. Why don't you answer that? Put it on speaker. I'd love to hear what Derek's fiancé has to say about all this." I stared at my phone as Amanda's name flashed on the screen for the third ring. Richard Henderson stood beside my coffee table, his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on the device with the intensity of a hunter watching prey. The fourth ring echoed through my penthouse like a countdown to an explosion. "Answer it," Richard said quietly, but his tone carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I swiped to accept the call and immediately put it on speaker. Amanda's voice filled my living room bright with artificial cheer and barely concealed anxiety. Boris, thank God you picked up. Listen, I know this is awkward timing, but Derek is having some kind of panic attack here. He keeps mumbling about his boss in some meeting and he mentioned your name. I thought maybe you could... Hello, Amanda. Richard interrupted, his voice cutting through her words like a blade through silk. This is Richard Henderson, Derek's boss. I'm currently standing in your brother's penthouse. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the distant sound of conversation and laughter from Amanda's Easter gathering in the background. When she finally spoke, her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. You're in Boris's apartment. Indeed I am. Beautiful place, by the way. The Wall Street Journal profile really doesn't do justice to your brother's success. I'm curious, Amanda, did Derek mention that I was meeting with Boris today? Through the speaker, I could hear Amanda's sharp intake of breath, followed by muffled sounds that suggested she was moving to a more private location. A door closed, cutting off the background noise of her party. I don't understand. Derek said you had some important meeting today, but he never said it was with... Her voice trailed off as the implications began to sink in. Richard's smile was cold and predatory. He never said it was with his future brother-in-law. The same brother-in-law he's been using as professional currency at my firm for the past 6 months. How interesting. What do you mean using as professional currency? Derek has built his entire career strategy around his access to Boris. He's positioned himself as my firm's connection to cutting-edge AI technology, implying he has special insights through his family relationship. Rather ironic, considering Boris tells me he had no knowledge of these representations. I watched Richard orchestrate this revelation with the skill of a master manipulator. He was destroying Derek's professional life with surgical precision, using Amanda as the unwitting instrument of her fiancé's downfall. Amanda, I said, finding my voice, did you know Derek has been talking about me at work? No, I mean he mentions you sometimes, but... He mentions me constantly, Richard corrected. In fact, just this morning he texted me asking if he should tell your family about my meeting with the famous tech guy from the newspaper. Imagine my surprise when I realized he was referring to the same brother you apparently found too pathetic to invite to Easter dinner. The sharp gasp from Amanda was audible even through the speaker. I could picture her face, the color draining from her cheeks as she processed the devastating irony of the situation. Boris, I never knew Derek was... Of course you didn't, Richard interrupted again. Because Derek has been playing both sides of this relationship. Professionally, he's been leveraging his connection to Boris as a career advantage. Personally, he's been allowing you to exclude Boris from family events. It's quite the balancing act. Through the phone, we could hear urgent knocking and Derek's voice calling Amanda's name. Amanda. Amanda, is everything okay in there? Who are you talking to? That's Derek now, Richard observed with obvious satisfaction. Why don't you let him in? I'd love to speak with him directly. The sound of a door opening came through the speaker, followed by Derek's voice strained with panic. Amanda, what's going on? Why do you look like you've seen a ghost? Derek, Amanda said, her voice barely steady. Richard Henderson is on the phone. He's at Boris's apartment. The silence that followed was even more profound than Amanda's initial shock. When Derek finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. What? Richard leaned toward my phone, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years of Wall Street authority. Hello, Derek, enjoying your Easter celebration. I'm having a fascinating conversation with your future brother-in-law about your representation of your relationship with him to our firm. Mr. Henderson, I can explain. Oh, I'm sure you can. But first, I'm curious about something. This morning you texted me asking about telling your family about my meeting with the famous tech guy from the newspaper. Were you planning to take credit for arranging this meeting? No, sir, I would never. I was just what, Derek? Just trying to impress your fiancé's family with your insider knowledge? just positioning yourself as the architect of a business relationship. You had no role in creating SNI. Through the speaker, I could hear Derek's labored breathing and what sounded like Amanda sinking into a chair. The carefully orchestrated Easter celebration was crumbling in real time, and I found myself feeling almost sorry for them. Almost. Derek. Richard continued, his tone growing more dangerous. In my 40 years in this business, I've encountered every type of professional deception imaginable. But exploiting a family connection you haven't even properly cultivated while allowing that same family member to be excluded from gatherings, that's a special kind of stupid. Mr. Henderson, please, if I could just explain the context. The context is quite clear. You've been selling me access to Boris's innovations while simultaneously supporting his exclusion from your personal life. You've built professional relationships on promises you had no authority to make. And now on Easter Sunday, while I'm conducting a $50 million investment meeting with your future brother-in-law, you're texting me about managing the information flow to your family. I could hear Derek's world imploding through the phone speaker. His career, his relationship with Amanda, his future financial security. All of it was unraveling because of his own deception and manipulation. Derek, I said, speaking directly into the phone, did you really think you could use my reputation professionally while Amanda excluded me from family events? Did it never occur to you that this contradiction might eventually surface? Boris, I never meant for things to get this complicated. I was just trying to advance my career, and Amanda was just trying to protect the family from what? Richard interrupted. From associating with one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the country. From being connected to someone featured on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. What exactly were you protecting yourselves from? Amanda's voice, when she finally spoke, was barely a whisper. I was embarrassed. The divorce made me feel like Boris's life was falling apart, and I didn't want that associated with our celebration. Richard's laugh was cold and humorless. So you excluded your most successful family member because his personal life had a setback while your fiancé was building his entire professional strategy around access to that same family member's business success. The irony is almost artistic. Through the speaker, we could hear voices in the background, Amanda's Easter guests wondering where their hosts had disappeared, to the sounds of a celebration continuing without its orchestrators. Mr. Henderson. Derek said, his voice cracking with desperation. Is there any way we can discuss this privately, perhaps after the holiday Eve? Derek, there's nothing private about this conversation anymore. Your professional conduct has affected my business relationship with Boris, and your personal conduct reflects on your judgment and character. Both are now my concern. I looked at Richard, recognizing the expression on his face. He wasn't just angry about Derek's deception. He was enjoying the destruction he was orchestrating, savoring the power to unravel someone's life with surgical precision. Richard said, turning to face me directly, I think we should continue our business discussion. Derek and Amanda enjoy the rest of your Easter celebration. I'm sure you have a lot to discuss. Before either of them could respond, I ended the call. The sudden silence in my penthouse felt almost oppressive after the intensity of the conversation. Richard stood looking out my floor-to-ceiling windows at the Manhattan skyline, his hands clasped behind his back. That was quite educational, he said finally. I learned more about Derek's character in the last 10 minutes than I had in the previous 6 months of working with him. What happens to his career now? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Richard turned back to me, and for the first time since he'd arrived, his expression held something that might have been respect. Derek's career at my firm is finished, but frankly, that's the least interesting aspect of this situation. He walked back to my coffee table and picked up the Wall Street Journal article again, studying the technical specifications and market analysis included in the profile piece. Your AI platform is exactly what we need for our new quantitative trading division. The technology you've developed could revolutionize how we approach market analysis and investment decisions. I felt a surge of hope mixed with caution. Are you still interested in discussing the investment opportunity? Oh, I'm more than interested. I'm prepared to offer you $60 million instead of $50. but I have some additional conditions that I think you'll find quite interesting. Richard Henderson moved through my penthouse with the confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions that shaped entire industries. He settled into one of my leather chairs as if he owned the place, pulling out a tablet and beginning to scroll through what appeared to be financial projections. "Before we discuss terms," he said, not looking up from his screen, "I want you to understand something about how I conduct business. I've built Henderson & Associates into one of the premier investment firms on Wall Street by recognizing exceptional talent and providing the resources for that talent to flourish. But I've also survived 40 years in this industry by eliminating threats and neutralizing those who attempt to manipulate me." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made it clear this wasn't just a business conversation anymore. It was a masterclass in power dynamics. Derek Thompson represents both an opportunity and a liability. His deception demonstrates poor judgment and questionable ethics. His exploitation of your family relationship without proper foundation shows a fundamental misunderstanding of professional boundaries. I cannot allow such behavior to continue at my firms. I nodded, beginning to understand that this wasn't just about investment capital anymore. Richard was orchestrating something much more comprehensive. "However," he continued, "Derek's one useful contribution has been bringing your technology to my attention. Your AI platform represents exactly the kind of innovation that could give us a decisive advantage in quantitative trading. The market analysis capabilities you've developed are beyond anything currently available." He pulled up a new document on his tablet, turning it so I could see a preliminary term sheet. The numbers made my breath catch. $60 million in funding, but with equity stakes and performance bonuses that could potentially triple that amount within 2 years. "I'm prepared to offer you more than just investment capital," Richard said. "I want you to join Henderson & Associates as Chief Technology Officer with a substantial equity stake. You'll oversee the integration of your AI platform into our trading operations, and you'll have the authority to build and manage your own technology division within our firm." The implications hit me immediately. As CTO of Henderson & Associates, I would be Derek's superior. I would have direct oversight of his performance and conduct. The poetic justice was almost overwhelming. "There's more," Richard continued, apparently reading my thoughts. "As part of your role, you'll be responsible for evaluating the performance and professional conduct of all junior partners in our technology investment division. Derek's future at our firm would be entirely dependent on your assessment of his capabilities and character." I leaned back in my chair, processing the enormity of what Richard was offering. Not only would this deal save my company and restore my financial security, but it would also place me in a position to address Derek's professional misconduct from a position of ultimate authority. "This isn't just about business revenge," Richard clarified. "Your technology is genuinely revolutionary, and your expertise is exactly what we need to dominate the next generation of financial markets. But I won't pretend that the opportunity to address Derek's deception isn't a satisfying bonus." 25 miles away in Westchester, Amanda's Easter celebration was collapsing into chaos. Derek had locked himself in their bedroom, frantically making phone calls to colleagues and mentors, trying to understand the extent of the damage to his career. Amanda sat in her kitchen, staring at the elaborate spread of Easter foods that no one was eating anymore. Their guests had begun asking uncomfortable questions about the tension between their hosts, and Amanda had been forced to make excuses about work stress and family complications. Several people had already left, claiming sudden obligations elsewhere. Derek's parents cornered Amanda in her hallway, demanding explanations for their son's obvious distress and the mysterious phone call that had triggered his panic. Amanda found herself unable to explain the situation without revealing the extent of Derek's professional deception and her own cruelty toward her brother. "We need to call Boris," Derek said when he finally emerged from their bedroom, his face pale and his usually perfect hair disheveled. "We need to apologize and try to fix this before it gets worse." "How much worse can it get?" Amanda asked, though she was afraid of the answer. "Richard Henderson can destroy my career not just at our firm but throughout the entire industry. His recommendation carries weight everywhere on Wall Street. If he decides I'm persona non grata, I'll never work in finance again." Amanda felt the foundation of their life together shifting beneath her feet. Derek's career trajectory had been the basis for all their future plans. The house in the Hamptons, they'd discussed the wedding venue, they'd reserved the lifestyle they'd assumed they would be able to afford. "What about Boris?" she asked quietly. "What if we apologize to him? What if we explain that this was all a misunderstanding?" Derek's laugh was bitter and hollow. "A misunderstanding. Amanda, I've been using his name professionally for months without his knowledge or permission. I positioned myself as his liaison to one of the most powerful men on Wall Street, and you excluded him from family events because you were embarrassed by his divorce." The full scope of their betrayal was becoming clear to Amanda for the first time. She had focused so intently on protecting herself from association with Boris's personal failure that she had never considered how her brother might feel about being excluded from family gatherings. Meanwhile, in my penthouse, Richard was outlining the specific terms of his offer with the precision of a contract lawyer. The technology transfer would be structured as a merger between Neural Dynamics and Henderson's new quantitative trading division. I would retain ownership of my core innovations while gaining access to Henderson's resources and market reach. "The timeline is aggressive," Richard explained. "I want the integration completed within 6 months with full deployment of your AI platform across our trading operations by the end of the year. Can your technology handle that scale of implementation?" "Absolutely," I replied, my confidence growing as I understood the scope of the opportunity. The platform was designed for scalability. With proper resources, we could be processing billions of transactions within the first quarter. Richard nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Now regarding Derek's situation. I assume you understand that his continued employment at our firm creates a potential conflict of interest, given your new role?" "I understand the complexity," I said carefully, trying to balance my desire for justice with professional objectivity. "But I also believe in fair evaluation of performance based on merit, rather than personal history." "Admirable," Richard said, though his tone suggested he doubted Derek would survive an objective performance review. "We'll structure your authority to ensure complete independence in personnel decisions within your division." As we continued discussing the technical aspects of the deal, my phone buzzed with a text message. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, accompanied by a message that made my stomach tighten. "Saw the WSJ article. Sounds like things are going well. Would love to catch up over coffee sometime." Richard noticed my expression change and glanced at the phone screen. "Your ex-wife?" "Yes. Apparently success makes me more attractive than failure." "It usually does. Are you planning to respond?" I looked at the message again, then at Richard's knowing expression. 6 months ago, a text like this from Jessica would have sent me into an emotional spiral of hope and confusion. Now, sitting in my penthouse with one of Wall Street's most powerful investors offering me the deal of a lifetime, Jessica's attempt at reconciliation felt more like an annoyance than an opportunity. "No," I said, deleting the message without responding. "I'm not interested in looking backward anymore." Richard's smile was approving. "Good. Moving forward requires leaving behind those who only valued you when you were convenient." As if summoned by our conversation about inconvenient relationships, my doorman called up again. "Sir, there's a young woman in the lobby who says she's your sister. She seems quite upset and insists it's an emergency." Richard and I exchanged glances. "This should be interesting," he said. "Why don't you let her up? I'd like to observe the family dynamics firsthand." I authorized Amanda's access, then turned to Richard. "Are you sure you want to witness this conversation?" "Oh, I wouldn't miss it for anything. Understanding family dynamics is crucial for evaluating long-term business partnerships. Besides, I'm curious to see how someone justifies excluding their most successful relative from family gatherings." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Amanda stepped into my penthouse wearing her Easter dress and an expression of barely controlled panic. Her usually perfect makeup was smudged around her eyes, and her carefully styled hair showed evidence of nervous finger combing. She looked around my living space with obvious surprise, as if seeing the luxury and sophistication for the first time. "Boris, thank God," she began, then stopped abruptly when she noticed Richard Henderson rising from his chair in my living room. The intimidating presence of one of Wall Street's most powerful figures in her brother's home seemed to steal her ability to speak. "Amanda," Richard said with polite formality, extending his hand in greeting. "Richard Henderson. We spoke on the phone earlier. Please, come in. Your brother and I were just concluding some business discussions." Amanda shook his hand mechanically, her eyes darting between Richard and me, as if trying to understand the dynamic between us. She had clearly expected to find me alone and vulnerable, someone she could apologize to and manipulate back into family harmony. Instead, she found me in a position of apparent strength and respect. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said hesitantly. "I just needed to speak with Boris about what happened earlier. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Richard settled back into his chair with the relaxed posture of someone enjoying an entertaining performance. "Please don't let my presence inhibit your conversation. I find family dynamics fascinating, particularly when they intersect with business relationships." Amanda looked at me pleadingly, clearly hoping I would ask Richard to give us privacy. When I made no move to do so, she seemed to realize that the balance of power in our relationship had shifted fundamentally. "Boris, I need you to understand that I never meant to hurt you with that text message. I was just trying to protect our family celebration from any awkwardness or uncomfortable questions about your situation." "My situation," I repeated, keeping my voice level and professional. "The divorce, I mean. People have been asking questions, and I thought it would be easier for everyone if we kept the gathering small and focused on positive things." Richard made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "Positive things like excluding the most successful member of your family because his personal life experienced a temporary setback." Amanda's face flushed red. "Mr. Henderson, with respect, this is a family matter. Actually, it became a business matter when your fiancé began exploiting his connection to Boris professionally, while you simultaneously excluded Boris from personal family events. The contradiction raises interesting questions about judgment and character." I watched Amanda process this information, seeing the moment when she understood that her treatment of me had professional consequences for Derek that extended far beyond their relationship. "I didn't know Derek was talking about Boris at work," she said quietly. "He wasn't just talking about him," Richard corrected. "He was building his entire career strategy around access to Boris's innovations. He positioned himself as my firm's gateway to cutting-edge technology, implying he had special insights through family relationships." Amanda sank onto my couch without being invited, the weight of the situation finally hitting her fully. "How bad is this for Derek's career?" "That depends on several factors," Richard replied, glancing at me meaningfully. "Boris will be joining our firm as Chief Technology Officer with oversight of our quantitative trading division. Derek's future employment will be subject to performance reviews conducted under Boris's authority." The blood drained from Amanda's face as she understood the implications. Her brother, whom she had excluded from Easter dinner as too pathetic to be seen in public, was now positioned to control her fiancé's professional future. "Boris," she whispered, "please. I know I made a terrible mistake. I was jealous and scared, and I handled everything wrong. But Derek doesn't deserve to lose his career because of my poor judgment." I studied my sister's face, seeing genuine remorse mixed with desperation. For the first time in months, she was looking at me as someone whose opinion mattered, someone whose decisions could affect her life. "Amanda helped me understand something," I said. "You found my divorce embarrassing enough to exclude me from family gatherings, but Derek found my professional success valuable enough to build his career on it. How do I reconcile those two perspectives?" She started to speak, then stopped, apparently realizing that any explanation would only highlight the hypocrisy of their treatment of me. "I was wrong," she said finally. "I was completely, inexcusably wrong. The divorce made me feel like your life was falling apart, and I was afraid that being associated with failure would somehow diminish our own success." "But I wasn't failing," I pointed out. "My business was thriving. My innovations were being recognized industry-wide. and I was featured on the cover of the Wall Street Journal as a success story. You chose to focus on one aspect of my life while ignoring everything else. Richard leaned forward in his chair, his expression intent. Amanda, in my experience, people who abandon family members during difficult times reveal fundamental character flaws. Your brother raised you after your parents died, supported your education, and celebrated your achievements. When he faced personal challenges, you excluded him, rather than offering support. Amanda began crying, tears streaming down her cheeks as the full weight of her betrayal became clear. I know I failed him as a sister and as a human being. I was so focused on appearances and maintaining this perfect image that I forgot what family actually means. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Boris, please call me. I'll do anything to fix this situation. I never meant for my professional discussions to interfere with family relationships. I showed the message to Richard, who read it with obvious amusement. He's still trying to manage the situation through manipulation. Notice how he frames this as interference with family relationships, rather than acknowledging his professional misconduct. What would you do in my position? I asked Richard. Professionally, I would evaluate Derek based on his performance integrity and potential value to the organization. Personally, I would consider whether people who treat family members as professional assets while supporting their exclusion from personal events deserve positions of trust and responsibility. Amanda looked up from her tears. What does that mean for Derek? It means, Richard said, that Derek's future depends on whether he can demonstrate genuine value to our firm beyond his supposed family connections. It means he'll need to prove his worth through actual performance rather than implied access to innovations he had no role in creating. I felt a complex mix of emotions watching my sister's distress. Part of me wanted to comfort her to restore the family harmony we had once shared, but another part of me recognized that her tears came only after facing consequences, not from genuine understanding of how her actions had affected me. Amanda, I want you to understand something, I said. The pain you caused me wasn't just about missing Easter dinner. It was about being abandoned by the person I raised, supported and protected when she decided I was no longer valuable to her image. I know, she sobbed. I know, and I hate myself for it. Richard stood and walked to my windows, looking out at the Manhattan skyline while giving us a moment of relative privacy. Boris, I think we should continue our business discussions. You have some important decisions to make about your future, and time is valuable. Amanda looked up sharply. What decisions? Your brother is joining my firm as Chief Technology Officer, Richard said without turning around. He'll be overseeing a technology division with the authority to make personnel decisions affecting junior partners, including Derek. Amanda turned to me with a mixture of hope and fear. Boris, what are you going to do about Derek? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Jessica's name appeared on the screen again. Amanda noticed the caller ID and her expression shifted to something approaching panic. Are you going to answer that? Amanda asked. I looked at the phone, then at Richard, who had turned back to watch this latest development. Jessica was calling now, probably after receiving no response to her text message. 6 months ago, her attention would have meant everything to me. Now it felt like just another manipulation attempt. I declined the call and looked directly at Amanda. No, I'm not interested in reconnecting with people who only value me when I'm successful. I'm not looking backward anymore. Richard smiled approvingly. Excellent decision. Moving forward requires leaving behind those who didn't appreciate what they had. Amanda seemed to understand that she was being included in that category of people who hadn't appreciated what they had. The tears came harder as she realized that her apology might not be sufficient to repair the damage she had caused. What can I do to make this right? She asked. I don't know if you can, I replied honestly. Trust has to be rebuilt through actions over time, not through apologies motivated by consequences. Right now, I need to focus on my future rather than managing relationships with people who excluded me from theirs. Richard checked his watch and moved toward the door. Boris, I'll have our legal team prepare the formal agreements for your review. Plan to start Monday morning. We have a lot of work ahead of us. As Richard prepared to leave, Amanda made one final desperate attempt. "Mr. Henderson, please. I know Derek made mistakes, but he's not a bad person. He just got caught up in trying to advance his career and made poor decisions." Richard paused at the door, considering her words. "Amanda, in my experience, character is revealed through behavior under pressure. Derek chose to exploit family connections he hadn't earned while supporting the exclusion of the very person he was using professionally. Those choices reflect his fundamental values." "But people can change," Amanda protested. "People can learn from their mistakes and become better." "Perhaps," Richard conceded, "that will be for Boris to determine in his professional capacity. Good day." After Richard left, Amanda and I sat in silence for several minutes. The weight of everything that had happened settled between us like a physical presence. "I've destroyed everything, haven't I?" she finally asked. "You made choices," I replied. "Now you have to live with the consequences of those choices." "What about Derek? What about our future together?" I looked at my sister, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in years. She was still focused on what she might lose, rather than what she had already thrown away. "That depends on whether Derek can prove his professional value independent of his connection to me, and whether you can learn to value family relationships for reasons other than social convenience." Amanda left my penthouse that afternoon with no guarantees and no easy path to redemption. As I watched her go, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. The family dynamics that had defined my adult life were fundamentally changed, but perhaps that change was necessary for my own growth. 6 months after that pivotal Easter Sunday, I stood in the corner office that Richard Henderson had designed specifically for me, on the 42nd floor of the Henderson and Associates building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Manhattan's financial district, and the sophisticated technology setup allowed me to monitor our AI trading platform in real time. The transformation had been remarkable. Neural Dynamics had merged seamlessly with Henderson's quantitative trading division, creating a hybrid operation that combined my innovative technology with their market expertise and capital resources. The AI platform was processing over $2 billion in transactions daily, consistently outperforming human traders and traditional algorithms by margins that had attracted attention throughout the financial industry. My personal wealth had grown exponentially. The initial $60 million investment had been followed by performance bonuses and equity stakes that pushed my net worth well beyond what I had achieved before the divorce. More importantly, I had gained something invaluable: the respect and mentorship of one of Wall Street's most legendary figures. Richard had become more than a business partner. He had filled a role in my life that I hadn't even realized was vacant. That of a father figure who understood both success and failure, who could guide professional decisions with wisdom earned through decades of experience. Our relationship had evolved from purely transactional to genuinely paternal, built on mutual respect and shared values. Derek's situation had resolved itself with predictable efficiency. His performance reviews under my oversight had revealed what Richard had suspected. From the beginning, Derek was competent but not exceptional, capable of following directions but lacking the innovative thinking and ethical foundation required for senior leadership. After 3 months of documented underperformance and continued evidence of poor judgment, Derek had voluntarily resigned from Henderson and Associates. The resignation had been presented as a mutual decision, allowing Derek to preserve some professional dignity, while acknowledging that his career trajectory at our firm was limited. Richard's recommendation letters had been diplomatically neutral, neither endorsing Derek's capabilities nor explicitly condemning them. The result was that Derek found new employment at a smaller firm with reduced responsibilities and a significantly lower salary. Amanda and Derek's relationship had ended 2 months after Easter. The financial pressure of Derek's reduced income, combined with the ongoing tension from their professional and personal betrayals, had proven too much for their engagement to survive. Amanda had returned the ring and moved back into a smaller apartment in Manhattan, taking a new position at a different marketing firm after her previous employer had downsized her department. The irony was not lost on me that Amanda's fear of being associated with my failure had ultimately led to genuine failures in her own life. Her treatment of me had cost her the relationship she had been trying to protect, the financial security she had been attempting to preserve, and the family connection that had defined her identity since childhood. But the story was not one of simple revenge or poetic justice. 3 months after Derek's resignation, Amanda had contacted me requesting a meeting. She had spent the intervening time in therapy working to understand the jealousy and insecurity that had driven her cruel behavior. Her apology, when it finally came, was different from her desperate Easter Sunday plea. "I've been thinking about what family actually means," she had said during that difficult conversation in my office. "I realized that I spent so many years competing with you that I forgot we were supposed to be on the same team. When your marriage ended, instead of supporting you, I saw it as validation that you weren't as perfect as I had always believed." She had continued working on herself, taking a less prestigious but more fulfilling position at a nonprofit marketing firm, downsizing her lifestyle to match her reduced income, and focusing on building genuine relationships rather than maintaining appearances. Our interactions had gradually become more frequent and more authentic, though trust was rebuilding slowly through consistent actions rather than grand gestures. The extended family members who had witnessed Amanda's exclusion of me from Easter had rallied around the truth once it became clear. They had been horrified by Amanda's behavior and embarrassed by their own passive acceptance of her decision. Several cousins and aunts had reached out to apologize for not questioning her judgment and to ensure I knew they valued our family connection. Christmas had provided an opportunity to test our evolving family dynamics. Instead of excluding anyone, we had organized a celebration that honored both our shared history and our individual growth. Amanda had attended, but without demanding center stage or attempting to manage other people's perceptions. Derek had not been invited by mutual agreement, allowing the gathering to focus on healing rather than managing uncomfortable dynamics. My personal life had also transformed in unexpected ways. Sarah Mitchell, a fellow entrepreneur I had met through professional networks, had become a significant presence in my world. Unlike my marriage to Jessica, which had been built on college romance and shared dreams, my relationship with Sarah was founded on mutual respect for each other's achievements and compatible life goals. Sarah understood the demands of building a business from nothing. She had created her own successful consulting firm, specializing in sustainable technology implementations, and she appreciated both the sacrifices required for professional success and the importance of maintaining personal relationships. Our partnership felt balanced and mature in ways my previous relationship never had. Jessica had continued her attempts at reconciliation for several weeks after our divorce, apparently motivated by news of my professional resurgence. Her messages and calls had gradually stopped when it became clear that I was genuinely uninterested in revisiting our failed marriage. The last communication had been a formal note, congratulating me on the Wall Street Journal profile and wishing me well in my future endeavors. The technology division I now headed had grown to include 12 engineers and analysts, all working to expand the applications of our AI platform beyond trading into broader financial services. We were developing predictive models for market volatility risk assessment tools for investment portfolios and decision support systems for merger and acquisition analysis. Richard had begun discussing succession planning, acknowledging that his retirement was approaching and that the firm needed leadership prepared for the next generation of financial services. My role had expanded beyond technology implementation to include strategic planning and client relationship management, grooming me for potential executive leadership. The most profound change, however, was internal. The divorce and family rejection that had once felt like devastating failures now seemed like necessary steps in my personal development. I had learned to derive confidence from my own achievements rather than from external validation, to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than need or convenience. Standing in my office that December afternoon, reviewing the performance metrics that showed our AI platform had generated over $800 million in profits for the firm in its first 6 months of operation, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The pain of exclusion from Amanda's Easter celebration had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my family relationships and my own need for approval. Derek's professional exploitation had revealed the difference between genuine connection and transactional relationships. Richard's mentorship had shown me what authentic respect and support looked like in practice. I had learned that true success was not measured by the absence of failure, but by the ability to transform setbacks into opportunities for growth. My divorce had not been a reflection of my worth as a person, but rather an indication that I had outgrown a relationship built on outdated assumptions and incompatible goals. The family dynamic with Amanda was still evolving, but it was now based on honesty rather than obligation, on mutual respect rather than historical roles. She was learning to value my presence for reasons beyond social convenience, while I was learning to offer support without enabling destructive behavior. Perhaps most importantly, I had discovered that seeking approval from those who did not appreciate my authentic self was not only futile, but counterproductive. Building a life aligned with my own values surrounded by people who respected my achievements and supported my growth had proven far more satisfying than trying to meet the expectations of those who had already decided I was inadequate. As Christmas approached, I was preparing to host a celebration in my penthouse for the first time since the divorce. Sarah would be there along with Richard and his wife, several colleagues from the firm, and yes, Amanda. But this gathering would be different from the desperate family events of the past. It would be a celebration of authentic relationships built on mutual respect rather than social obligation. The guest list was smaller, but more meaningful. Every person attending was someone who had chosen to be part of my life based on appreciation for who I actually was, not who they needed me to be for their own purposes. The difference was profound and liberating. Derek had sent a card wishing me well along with a brief note acknowledging his mistakes and expressing genuine remorse for his professional and personal misconduct. I had read it with interest rather than anger, recognizing it as part of his own growth process while feeling no obligation to facilitate his emotional recovery. The card went into my desk drawer acknowledged but not answered. Some relationships could be rebuilt through patience and demonstrated change. Others were better left as learning experiences and cautionary tales. On Christmas Eve, as I prepared for the next day's celebration, I received a text from Amanda. "Thank you for giving me the chance to earn my way back into your life. I know I have more work to do, but I'm grateful for your patience with my growth process." Her message reflected the maturity she was developing through therapy and life experience. She was no longer demanding instant forgiveness or trying to manage my emotions for her own comfort. She was simply acknowledging the work required to rebuild trust and expressing appreciation for my willingness to allow that process to unfold. I responded simply, "Family is about supporting each other through growth, not just celebrating when it's convenient. See you tomorrow." As I prepared for bed that Christmas Eve, I reflected on a question that had become central to my personal philosophy. How do we respond when those who should support us choose instead to abandon or exploit us? The answer I had learned was not through bitterness or revenge, though both emotions were natural and understandable. The answer was through building a life so aligned with our own values and so surrounded by genuine relationships that the approval of those who had abandoned us became irrelevant. Success was not about proving our worth to those who had doubted us. It was about creating meaning and value independent of external validation, about becoming the kind of person we respected, regardless of whether others recognized our achievements. The greatest victory was not Amanda's eventual apology or Derek's professional downfall. It was the discovery that I could build a fulfilling life without needing their approval or participation. When they chose to exclude me from their world, I had responded by building a better world of my own. Have you ever faced a moment when family members or close friends excluded you during difficult times, only to seek reconnection when your circumstances improved? How did you balance forgiveness with self-respect? And what did that experience teach you about the true nature of relationships? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might benefit from hearing about the power of building authentic success, independent of others' approval. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming personal setbacks and transforming challenges into opportunities for growth. Thank you for joining me on this journey of discovery about family success and the courage to build a life aligned with your own values. May you find the strength to surround yourself with people who appreciate your authentic self, and may you never have to choose between your self-respect and others' approval.